Welcome to SkyeTeam's People First with Morag Barrett.
Welcome to this week's episode of People First. And boy, is it going to be a doozy, because my guest this week is Garry Ridge, who is the CEO and chairman of the WD-40 company. Now, all of you, I'm sure, have a can of WD-40 somewhere in your home or somewhere based on a story I'm remembering fixing my bike with my dad. The smell is evocative. The whole can design is evocative. And we've got Garry here. So as CEO and chairman of the WD-40 company, Garry is responsible, well, for all things, whether it's operations and relationships. And I was reading, actually, Garry, your latest annual report where you talk about the tribe. And I know I want to dive deeper in that. But in the meantime, Garry, welcome to People First.
G'day, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Look, I've got to give you my official introduction. Is that okay?
Do it. Go on. Do I need to do a drum roll or anything?
No, it's fine. G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company.
I can't wait to write that down and see whether that acronym actually then spells a word too. But I love that. Consciously incompetent, probably wrong. Okay, love it, because I was going to ask you about vulnerability. But I'm actually going to start with maybe an easy question. I want your origin story, Garry, when you were a wee lad. So you're still at elementary school, primary school in Australia, and the teacher's going, Garry, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer?
I don't actually remember what my answer was, to be honest. But I can tell you something really funny. In Australia, where I grew up, and it's great. We've got an Aussie and I'm going to call you a Pom. Is that okay?
That is fine. I'm sure I can come up with something back at you later on.
but anyhow, an Aussie and an English person on the line. But we went to vocational guidance, and they did kind of a test where at the end of it, they said, this is what you're best adapted to for your future career. And they said I was going to be a linesman, like a telephone linesman. Now, you know why that's so silly? Because I hate heights. So
yeah. We're twins. You hate heights. So they'd got you pigeonholed as a linesman. Okay.
No.
All right. Well, I suppose you'd have got a good view from up there. And pretty impressive job. So what was the pivot point then from directed linesman to actually the career that ended up unfolding for you?
Well, I think it all started. I was the youngest of four. There was quite a difference between my next brother and I, 12 years. So I kind of grew up in an adult household, but I just loved interaction. I worked on the back of a milk truck when I was 6 years old. I sold papers. I was always out there doing things. My mum, who lived to be 99 years and 9 months old, she only passed away 8 years ago. So mum and dad lived through the Great Depression and all that sort of stuff. So we grew up with an attitude of get out there and be part of something. So I was working at a local sports store and a hardware store, and I really got a passion at that time for the interaction of people, and I loved it. And I went from there, and I started my true working career informally in retail. I was a management trainee with a large department store group in Australia, and I was doing their management trainee course. So that was kind of the path that led me to the next step and the next step and the next step. I've only ever applied for one job in my life, and that was
milk cart?
No, I didn't apply for that. But that was my first job at a department store called Walton's in Australia. And each step after that, I was invited to go and do something else.
So that's interesting, because you talked there on the influence of your parents. You talked there about always being interested in the interaction. So what role have relationships played in your career and success to date?
Well, today, when I look back, I realized they played a bigger role than I ever thought, because, we are social animals, human beings. We want to be connected. And I think that understanding is so important in that if we treat people with respect and dignity, and I read something about the Dalai Lamas years ago, and he said our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And I just love that. If ever I could have one wish, I really would like to know what I know today, and I've learned it through scar tissue and learning moments, and be able to apply it for a longer period of time than I probably have left. So, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to amplify it for the next 30 or 40 years, however long I'm given the opportunity to do that.
So tell me a little bit about that scar tissue. What's one of the leadership lessons you've had to learn the hard way?
Oh, the three most important words I've ever learned in my life: I don't know, and getting comfortable with them. I think as a younger leader, vulnerability doesn't come naturally. You want to prove yourself. You always want to be right. Your ego tends to play a higher part of your behavior than it should. And just getting comfortable with those three words, I don't know, has been one of the biggest gifts I've hopefully given myself.
Does that get easier as you get more senior? I mean, as the CEO and chairman of a global organization, is the expectation that you do know? Tell me more about that.
I hope not, because it's not possible to know everything. What is important is to be able to be in a situation where you can set other people's minds and knowledge free. And does it get easier? It has become easier for me. I'm not sure why, other than probably I don't care anymore that I don't know. Maybe I care. Maybe early on I cared that I didn't know, and I thought someone would not think highly of me. But right now I don't really care if I don't know. I don't care if I don't know. But I tell you what, if it's important enough, someone will help me find out.
For me, in the new book that I have coming out later this year, You, Me, we talk about courage and vulnerability. And what you're describing there in saying, I don't know, it requires both. It requires courage to admit that gap and potential vulnerability as to how others might react. So how do you demonstrate that as a leader, where others may arrive with their own fears of, well, I can't say to Garry, I don't know, because I'm his big cheese of this, that, and the other. So how do you demonstrate courage and vulnerability as a senior leader? And what advice do you have for others as to how we can step into that?
Well, one of the things I think that's really paid a big dividend to us is looking at failure as learning. I'm going to make a statement here that you're going to go, wow, I have never made a mistake in my life.
Wow.
What I have had is millions of learning moments. So what we say, a learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to help all people. So at the company, at WD-40 Company, we don't make mistakes. We have learning moments. And those learning moments create curiosity. They reduce fear. And I think just being vulnerable, and a great example of vulnerability or just being there is when COVID hit. Suddenly we all had to become more competent at being good at virtual and using virtual tools. So we installed all this wonderful technology at WD-40 Company, and I was forever frustrated that we weren't using it to what I saw its greatest potential was. And the reason was fear. People were afraid. And then COVID hit, the switch is hit, it became compulsory. So I purposely, during a number of early virtual meetings, I purposely had something happen. I screwed up, I just, because I wanted to show people it's okay. I mean, it's okay. And people need to get comfortable with that. I say that, candor in an organization is very important. And I describe it as no lying, no faking, no hiding. I believe most people don't lie. I believe people fake and hide because of fear. And if you can take that fear away so people aren't faking and hiding, you get the real person.
I'm writing that down because the fourth element of the ally mindset that we talk about in You, Me, We is candor and debate. And it's that mythical, well, it's how do you create a culture where people feel able to speak up? Because as a leader, it's career limiting for me if people aren't, but potentially as the bearer of bad news for somebody who's junior with the wrong leadership style, it is career limiting for them if they do. And so I love this idea of removing fear. So how did you go about doing that at WD-40 Company?
Well, number one, we say we don't make mistakes. We have learning moments,
Mm-hmm.
which is really important. Number two is we took the word manager out of the business. We don't have managers, we have coaches. And the number one responsibility of a coach is not to run on the field and play the game. That's what the micro manager does. You know, and that's what this guy does. This is Al. If I introduce you to Al.
Okay. Yeah. No, you haven't. Please. Nice to meet you, Al, I think. So tell me about Al.
You do not like Al.
Okay.
Al is the soul sucking CEO or the soul sucking leader. And Al has a number of attributes that suck the soul out of culture. He must always be right. He's a micromanager. He's corporate royalty. He hates feedback. You know, he doesn't like to learn. He's all of these things. That's the manager side of it. We have coaches. And what's the role of a coach? Well, you being from the UK originally and me being from Australia, we've probably watched a couple of rugby games in our time. We've never seen the coach of a rugby team actually run onto the field and play the game. Mm-hmm. A great coach spends their time on the sideline and in the locker room, a lot of time in the locker room. Secondly, you never see the great coach actually standing on the podium and taking the prize. Mm-hmm. It's the team that does that. But a micromanaging, soul-sucking leader is running onto the field all the time, wanting to play the game. So he's proving to the team that he doesn't trust them. And when the time comes to take the prize, he wants to be up on the podium. So removing fear, getting people to be comfortable says, I'm not going to play your game, but what I want to do is help you step into the best version of your personal self.
So you had an Al avatar there. Do you have a coach manager equivalent?
I do, but it's not in bold form. It's in a graphic form.
Yeah, fair enough. So as I said at the beginning, I read through the latest annual report, and that whole bring your human to work, people first, the importance of relationships comes through right from page 1 and from your opening letter. And you talk about WD-40 Company and our tribe equals our success. And it goes on to say, we are a tribe, and as a tribe, we're here for each other as much as we're here for the company. And then it goes on. Now, I know you've been with WD-40 Company for a number of years. How would you describe the culture when you arrived? And if you're now at our tribe equals our success, how did you affect or how did the organization recognize and embrace that change? Because that can be a big gap as I think about my own career, and the whole idea of bringing a human to work, certainly when I started in finance, was a big no-no. Right. So tell me about that journey and what that means for WD-40 Company.
Sure. So yeah, I've been there a while, in fact, 35 years. And the culture when I joined was great. It was okay for the company at that time. The company back then was a lot smaller than it is. It was based in the US. It had very little business outside of the US. And basically, you could get everybody in a room and communicate with them. However, that wasn't our dream. Our dream was to take the blue and yellow can with a little red top to the world. And to do that, we had to create a culture where we set people free. And I was fortunate enough when I was given the privilege to lead the company to understand that I didn't know how to do it. So here I am, 20 some years ago, appointed CEO of a US public company. I'd been in the United States for 3 years. And what's this Aussie guy know about doing anything? So I went back to school. And I went to the University of San Diego. I did a master's degree in leadership. That's where I met my dear friend and my mentor, Dr. Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager. Ken's 82 years old now. I play 9 holes of golf with him most Wednesday afternoons. I'm just blessed to have he in my life as a mentor. But what I learned there was the power of servant leadership. So we said, what are the elements you need in an organization to move from what was kind of an insular organization into an expansive organization? And the first thing you needed was to be a people-first organization. So we said, number one, it's all about the people. Number two was purpose. Did we have a real reason to get up every day? And interestingly enough, in your opening remarks, you mentioned about using WD-40 on your bicycle years ago.
Yeah.
So our purpose, if you ask us what our purpose is, we're in the memories business. We exist to create positive, lasting memories, solving problems in factories, homes, and workshops of the world, which is a much more engaging purpose than saying, I'm here to stop squeaks. So
that's kind of good too when the squeak is driving one nuts and it's like, exactly. Oh, for heaven's sake. So
people, memories, purpose. Yeah. The next thing was values. We said, what are the hierarchical set of values that will protect people and set them free? And then finally, we said, how do you create a high will of the people? Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC, said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. Duh. So what do we need to do? Yeah. We need to create a culture where there is pleasure in the job, which then led into tribes, because one of the biggest desires we have as human beings is to belong. Everybody who is with us today has left a company, an event, or even a relationship because they didn't feel like they belong. So we said, what is the core of belonging in humanity? It was tribes. Everybody grew up years ago within a tribe. And what was the purpose of a tribe? A group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. So we said, we're going to have a tribe. Our number one attribute of our tribe, our promise to each other, is a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other, because if we do that, they'll feel safe. If they feel safe, they'll feel like they belong. If they feel like they belong, there'll be a high will of the people. If there's a high will of the people and a reasonable strategy, over time, we'll build an enduring business. And that's really the story.
I love that. So I'm curious, in terms of the impact of the pandemic, and you touched on this, in terms of now I am assuming across WD-40, you've got time and distance because you're working across geographies and time zones, but you've also now got people who are working through the technology that they're actually using, people who are on site in 3 dimensions. How do you nurture, or how have you had to redefine what that sense of belonging feels like, or how we create that sense of connection?
Great question. In that, one of the reasons we've done so well through these horrible times, and I tell you, I wish COVID never came. I wish it never came. However, there has been some benefits from the learning we got to have to adapt to a new environment. You know, in times of real and great need, people can pivot around fear. And there was a lot of fear, so we've pivoted around it. So how have we done that? Well, number one is, when COVID hit, we said, we are going to live our tribal promise, a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. So how do we continue that connection? So we did a lot of stuff and continue to do a lot to make sure that connection is staying in place. One of the most beautiful things I saw was our French team. We have a lot of people in France, and, you know, the French love their food and wine, and they were missing each other. So, you know, they had a virtual dinner where each French member was cooking a dinner in their home, and they're all live virtually. They're all sharing their cooking techniques, you know, drinking their French beer, which is champagne, and enjoying each other. So there was a lot. Now, here's something really, really interesting. Halfway through COVID, I said, let's go and do a cultural check-in. We felt that we had our cultural glue still in place. We felt that we weren't draining our cultural equity. So we went out and we did a midterm employee feedback survey. And the numbers came back, and as you know, we've got employee engagement at about 93%. One number that came back that I went, wow, 98% of our people right in the middle of COVID said, I am excited about my future at this company. And I said, wow, okay, why?
Uh-huh.
We went back and asked why. And they said, as a tribe, we kept our promise of a group of people that came together to protect and feed each other. And if we can get through this together, we can get through anything together. So, there's a big discussion now about, this whole movement of employment, what do they call it? The Great Resignation.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm calling it the Great Escape. People are escaping from toxic cultures because they're saying, I'm not putting up with this anymore. Once upon a time, I would go to work and I didn't really like it, but I went home and my life was okay. During COVID, life hasn't been okay, and neither has this toxic environment. So they're saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to find a place where I'm treated with respect and dignity, where I know I can be myself, where I can be creative, where all of these things can happen. And
it's powerful, and you're right, because when we evacuated the office in March 2020, I mean, it's all Blur's Day, it all feels the same right now. Many people were planning for it's going to be 2 weeks, and then it was, I'll be done by the summer, it'll be done by the holidays. And of course, now we're looking up, and 2 years later, the companies and leaders that haven't been as thoughtful and diligent about reinventing or recalibrating that experience are now feeling the pain, and hence the Great Resignation. As we look, though, to an indefinite future of this, though, what I'm hearing a lot, and I'm experiencing too, is that low-level stress and anxiety, and work was the one thing I could control. So I ended up working longer hours. Hey, I saved a commute. It was bed, desk, bed. So how are you helping people to recalibrate when work should happen? Just because I can get here in 10 steps doesn't mean I should start earlier. But also the balance between the haves and the have-nots, because in your environment, you've got manufacturing operations where it needs to be done in person. You no doubt have corporate roles that can be done from home. So as a tribe, there's two parts of that. How do you help as an individual make sure I'm getting that balance? And also as an organization, that the tribe doesn't split into the haves and have-nots, or the can and cannots?
Great question. And I think it's really, firstly, going out and being very deliberate about, we want people to treat themselves well during these times. And, as I said, we've never been an organization that's been one of corporate royalty. We treat each other with respect and dignity. We also looked at this, thing about work from home. And we said, work from home is not right. It's work from where. So our philosophy that we put out to our people is, we don't, unless you have to be at a certain place doing something, we don't care where you work from. You use our values in the organization. You're all responsible people to decide where you have to work from and what you have to do to get the job done. And we'll support you around that. So, I realized at one stage, I work from where? I've worked on an aeroplane, I've worked in a hotel room, I've worked on a beach, I've worked on a train, I've worked in the office, and it happens to so many people. So again, deliberately not creating these clusters of, the privileged and the not privileged is something that's really important to us.
So as you talk with other leaders across industries, are you noticing a shift in both the conversation and the appetite for this people first tribe perspective?
I think there's what I would say, I think there's a heightened curiosity in most cases. I would hope that COVID slapped a lot of leaders up the side of the head. BlackRock, the CEO letter from BlackRock just came out a few weeks ago, and the opening couple of pages, Larry Fink says, culture is so important in an organization now, and organizations that have strong cultures are doing better than others. Duh. I mean,
yeah.
So I'm hopeful, and that that there is a greater awareness of our job is to create pleasure in the job. Now, a lot of people say pleasure in the job. Does that mean the prisoners run the prison? No, it doesn't mean that. It means you have an organization that is, number one, recognizes the power of the people, has a true purpose, a great set of values, dedicated to learning. And then our tribal philosophy, the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. And here's the example of that. When we first started putting the tribe culture together, I studied some of the early behaviours of the Indigenous Australians and the Fijian Islanders. And one of the things that became very clear to me, for a tribe to exist and grow over time, it had to be a learning culture. So if we were to turn back the clock and observe a group of Indigenous Australians thousands of years ago at a tribal meeting, what would the tribal leader be doing? He'd be teaching the tribe members how to throw a boomerang. Why? Because if you couldn't throw a boomerang, your chances of survival were low, because it was the tool of survival.
Yeah.
So what's the number one responsibility of a tribal leader, a tribal coach, is to be a learner and a teacher. So again, that's something that's really important to the organization.
I love this. Thank you, Garry. Now, I know that you've shared some of your leadership insights in a book that you co-authored with Ken Blanchard. You mentioned him earlier on. Tell us more about that, so that those listening in, they can obviously follow you on the interwebs, but also potentially get their hands on the book and learn more.
Yeah, the book that Ken and I wrote is called Helping People Win at Work, a business philosophy called We're Not Going to Mark Your Paper, We're going to Help You Get an A. And the whole book came from a comment that Ken made when he was my professor. He said, when I was at university teaching at a university, I would give out the final paper at the beginning of the class. And the academic and administration would say, what the hell are you doing, Blanchard, giving out the final paper? And he said, not only am I giving out the final paper, but what am I going to do for the next 3 semesters? I'm going to help people learn the answers. And what became very clear to me is, in business, we don't do that. We have a stupid review system where we talk to people at the end of the year instead of coaching them along the way. So the whole book is about, really, how do you create an environment where you're not marking people's papers, you're helping them get A's. Because life is not about some stupid distribution chart. It's about helping people get A's. So that's the book we wrote. And then I just put another book out just recently called Leadership Lessons Through COVID. And it's a number of articles combined about what we learned of going through COVID. So leadership lessons of leading a thriving company through COVID.
I'm going to be ordering that as soon as we hang up here. Garry, you truly are an inspiration and a role model. Well, you and the whole tribe at WD-40 who've embraced this. So thank you for sharing your time and insights with everybody here on People First today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining Morag today. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you learned something worth sharing, share it. Cultivate your relationships today when you don't need anything before you need something. Be sure to follow SkyeTeam and Morag on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any ideas about topics we should tackle, interviews we should do, or if you yourself would like to be on the show, drop us a line at info@skyeteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and remember, business is personal and relationships matter. We are your allies.